the Taliban insurgency at all. So the one compound we visited in Sirkut was actually a place that we first reported about on Democracy Now! Months ago. We were there the day after the raid happened, where the U.S. claims to this day that a man was killed, Kari Shams-Udin, who doesn't exist, didn't live on the compound. No one in the village knows who he is. We interviewed the chief of police and says, never heard this guy's name. They killed an entire farm family named Shamsul Rahman. I mean, a father and his 4 sons that wiped out the male side of a family at night. And in an area that was completely peaceful and pro-government, erupted after that. There was a violent protest that tried to march to the capital, or to Jalalabad, and when they were blocked, they attacked the police station, tried to burn it down. A protester was killed in the clash after that. Every time there's been a raid subsequent to that, they've cut the highway. They've come out and blocked the most important logistical route in the country, which is outside of Jalalabad. So, you know, concrete evidence that these raids are actively undermining the fragile Afghan state.
You know, we're in this family's, mud brick kala compound. People live in these, they're like huge, almost small fortresses built up, 10, 12 feet high with mud brick walls. And then inside of it, you have multiple generations of families living. And we went there and we were welcomed into their home. I mean, what really was humbling is, for most people that are targeted in these night raids, the only Americans they've ever met are the people that killed their loved ones and me and Rick. And in fact, one elder in a family that we went to visit, said to our translator, and we found out about this later, first the Americans kill us and then they want to put us on camera. We were in this family's compound where this man, 8 people were gunned down, and U.S. forces threw a fragmentation grenade into a courtyard where children were sleeping outside because it was hot. And multiple children got hit with fragments of this in the face and the stomach, and we saw the injuries on these children. What crime did they commit? People in these areas thought bandits were coming in the middle of the night. No one comes into the homes of Muslims in Afghanistan at night except bandits or the Taliban, is how people perceive it. So they fight back, and then the U.S. says, well, they fired at us. This little girl comes up to Rick and I, who we had seen her playing in the background when we were interviewing her father, and she came up to us and she said to our translator, I have something I want to say to them.
How old was
she? And she was, I don't know, maybe 4 to 6. Yeah. And she actually was the niece of the guy that we were interviewing, and she came up to us and she said, my daddy wasn't a Talib, but the Americans killed him anyway. And it wasn't a staged thing or anything. We had watched her the whole time playing there, and she came up. We went to another place in Paktia province where this little girl was sort of weaving back and forth and repeating this thing, and Rick was filming her, and we were thinking that she was just playing, and we were filming a kid playing in a courtyard, and our translator had a tear going down his face, and we said, what did she say? And he said she was reciting all the members of her family that were killed in the night raid. They killed my mommy, they killed my aunt, they killed my uncle, and she was a kid playing, and this is a kid who's 3 or 4 years old. We met a kid who had been shot in the stomach and in another place by U.S. Special Operations Forces. They literally shot the speech out of him. He couldn't speak. And we didn't know this until, we're documenting these things in a sort of forensic way, going through each person that was killed, how were they killed, interviewing all of the eyewitnesses. No one's ever done a thorough investigation. So what Rick and I were trying to do is piece together all these targeted killings. So we're in this place in Paktia province, and we're interviewing all these people, and there's this kid, and we see this gaping wound in his stomach. And so we bring the camera over to interview him, and the translator asks him a question, and he's just kind of going like this, and then someone says that he can't speak, and he just puts his hand in front of his face and just starts wailing in front of our camera, going, ah. He wasn't like that before this incident. He is so traumatized. He got shot in his stomach that he literally can't speak anymore. And so when you think about the collective punishment that's being meted out against people based largely on false intelligence, you understand why the U.S. is failing in Afghanistan. The insurgency is spreading.
Were any of those attacks documented? Had the NATO ever talked about these? Had the U.S.?
Well, in the case of the one that, well, maybe Rick could answer that question about Sirkut.
Yeah, so in Sirkut and Nangarhar, we got the most information that we usually get, which is 3 lines in a press release. Taliban commander was killed, no civilian casualties. Then in the Logar, where they killed the imam, no recognition at all that anything had ever happened. In the Paktia case, there was enough pressure was brought to bear that finally they admitted that they had killed innocent people, and they attempted to apologize. But basically, you get no information. You only get the information that you happen to be in a position to demand from them, and even then, things are covered up.
We're going to break, then come back to this discussion. Our guests are Jeremy Scahill and Rick Rowley, investigative journalists who have just returned from Afghanistan. And when we come back, we're going to ask you about being unembedded, which is very rare for journalists in Afghanistan, Western journalists. Stay with us. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, Moments, Rabi Abu Khalil, and a shout-out to the students at Fannie Lou Hamer Freedom School from the Bronx who are all here watching today's show, learning about journalism. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. I can't think of a better time to learn about journalism than today with two investigative reporters, Jeremy Scahill and Rick Rowley. Jeremy just wrote a piece in The Nation called Killing Reconciliation, learning about journalism from unembedded journalists. Rick, talk about your experience being unembedded, going out of Kabul.
Yeah, I mean, this is my fourth trip to Afghanistan. I've been both embedded and unembedded on different trips. And, you know, in the first 48 hours we were in country, Jeremy had already spent more time unembedded outside of Kabul than 90% of the U.S. media that goes there. I mean, it's just it's night and day, the kind of difference of what you get when you're embedded with American troops and when you're outside. I mean, inside, of course, you know, when you're embedded with troops, you see the war from the perspective of our soldiers, and that is, you know, a tiny fraction of the story about the human story of what the war is on the ground. I mean, this has been the worst year for NATO and for the U.S. in terms of casualties in the war, but those numbers pale next to the civilian toll that this war takes. So. Yeah, I mean, if you're embedded with troops, you're getting, you know, a tenth of the story that needs to be told there.
And the thing is, too, you know, when we would travel to a place, we were often traveling. We would go and meet with tribal leaders before we were going to go into an area to seek permission to go in there. And part of the reason that we did that is we wanted to be able to speak to people away from any version of a threat or intimidation, and we wanted to be able to speak to them clearly about what they believed. Many journalists won't do that without security, and often what you get is, you know, journalists will be with soldiers, and then they'll kind of take a slight, segue over to the side and interview an Afghan civilian, and then that civilian's in their piece. But meanwhile, what you don't see is on the other side of the camera all of the U.S. forces that are there. So most media outlets in this country are portraying the war entirely from the perspective of embedded troops and Afghans who are being interviewed with the perception that if they say the wrong thing, the troops are going to arrest them or come back and get them. So I think that's part of why there's such a major disconnect from what people are saying on the ground and what we see represented on corporate television here in the U.S.
Well, speaking of a disconnect, there's been a lot of attention in